Yo, this is another Mr. Cole from another lecture group. Yo, I'm the class of from 2018, and let me now introduce my rappers today. We have Yixin and Hongyang. Now clap your hands and we shall start.
Let's go, it's 1A, that's the only way. You gotta be okay with Mr. Cole. I don't know why Mr. Cole. I don't know what the hell to rhyme to this slime.
Ladies,
take two.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause for the next MC, Mr. Cole. I'm your fellow colleague and your fellow student in your lecture group of the class of 2018. And today, I will be introducing my two sidekicks, Mr. Yixin and Hongyang from Korea. And now they're gonna bring you a rap to kick off this amazing podcast.
Yo, it's 1A, you'll be okay with Mr. Cole. You know where to go. Mr. Low, why am I so low? Let's go 1A, that's the only way. You won't be straight, you'll be okay. Let's go, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to my guest star performers, Jeremy, Yixin, and Hongyang. Hope you enjoyed that intro. A bit of a break from the techno and of the fake DJ, but nonetheless a wonderful intro to today's podcast. Haven't seen you guys in a while in the podcast, been pretty busy, but here I am to fill it in again. Now, today I want to take a break from the content from Team 1. I'll resume that perhaps next week because I thought there's something more urgent for me to discuss. I just don't have the time if you're in class, but perhaps through this podcast you can listen to it slowly and you can really learn about this topic and this skill on your own pace, and you can keep repeating it so that you can get a better understanding. Basically, what I want to do today for this podcast is to look at question 1A, the techniques of how to answer it, and actually what is the priority in answering question 1A. So, before proceeding further, I've uploaded a number of things on the Google Drive, so please go and check it out. But before you check out the stuff on the Google Drive, it'll be good for you to reread the entire SBQ, specifically on sources D and E, and look at the hypothesis for question 1A. And then if you can, you try to attempt it yourself first. If you're not going to write it in full, it's okay. Just come up with an outline plan and that kind of stuff before you listen to this podcast further. So you pause it first. Pause it. Okay, now you better pause it. Pause. Go and read D and E. Pause. You press pause first. Pause. The one that looks like an equal sign, but then vertical equal sign. Pause. You pause first. Then you go and read D and E, and then you come back to this podcast. Okay, welcome back to this podcast. I hope that you have taken a look at D and E, the sources D and E first, before you continue on this podcast. Now, let's look at question 1A, and we want to look at the objectives behind question 1A. I think the first thing that they want to test for question 1A is inference. So inference is a basic level kind of skill that is both for 1A and 1B. But for 1A, the inference, it requires you to look at both the similarities and the differences between the two sources. To get the top level marks, you need to identify both similarities and differences. But identifying the inferences, identifying these similarities and differences, even if you do both of them, actually will not get you very far. At most, I think it will give you an L2, and L2 maximum is 6. The higher marks or the higher evaluative kind of marks are coming in L3 and L4. And what do you need to do to achieve those things is look at point number 2 over here. Usage of source provenance and associated contextual details to explain the similarities and the differences. So it's not enough to just identify the similarities and differences, but you've got to explain why, given the provenance of that source or those two sources, do they converge in certain similarities, and why do they diverge in certain differences, using the provenance details and some context over the provenance to explain the similarities and the differences. Point number 3 over here, this part A, right, is not meant to test evaluation skills of reliability, usefulness, and credibility. So things to do like CK, CR, all that kind of tone provenance. No, we're not really looking for those. Those you can reserve for 1B. We're not really testing the reliability or the usefulness of the sources. We are just seeking to identify the similarities and differences and then use the provenance and the context to explain why there are these similarities and why there are these differences. So that's the general theory and the approach behind 1A. Through this podcast, we'll see how it can be applied. It will be good also to go back to your syllabus document to take a look at the LOMs. I'm not really concerned with L1 to L2. I'm looking at L3 and L4. The key difference I've highlighted in red. L3 is you do have some sort of attempt at evaluating the sources, providing that contextual understanding. There is some attempt there, but maybe it's too one-sided. Maybe one side collapses, or maybe both sides are not built up sufficiently enough. Then you will fall into L3. For L4, you can see the word that I highlighted over there is and. So on how far the sources corroborate and differ. The answer will also demonstrate a strong sense of critical evaluation of the sources throughout and provide insights into why they are similar or different. So you need to do both, providing a contextual understanding of similarity and differences as well. Now, for the structuring of the part 1A itself, these are kind of two of the major kind of structures that students normally use. There may be more than this, and really it's up to you, but I think these two will be sufficient for you to consider. The first one on the left, okay, you start out with a short introduction outlining the similarities and differences. So this is a broad introduction that is at the inference stage. So it just identifies D and E, what do they converge on, and D and E, what do they diverge on. So it's just identification of similarities and differences. It doesn't have to be very long, can be just a 1-2 liner kind of stuff, it doesn't matter. Then you move on to the identification of similarities. So this is the inference portion. This yellow box here is the inference portion, but this inference is specific to the similarities. Then after that, you can go into identification of the differences. So this is also inference, but is pertaining to the differences. And then after that, the next two boxes are the contextual understanding using the provenance of the source. Now these two boxes are where you get your higher marks. And the blue box over there, it provides a contextual understanding of the similarities between the two sources. And then for the last box, it provides a contextual understanding of the differences between the two sources. So that's one style, and this style basically settles all the inferences first and then moves on to all the contextual understandings. The other alternative to this is on the right, where basically it's just a switch around of the paragraphs. You identify the inference of the similarities first, then immediately you go on to the evaluation of the similarities. So the contextual understanding of why they are similar, you start with that. Then after that, you move on to the differences, and then you go on to the same contextual understanding for the differences. So this one is you settle all the similarities first, whether inference or evaluation, and then after that, you move on to the differences, whether for the inferences and then the evaluation. Now keep in mind that this whole thing, this part 1A, is only worth 10 marks. So it being worth 10 marks, you got to prioritize your time during the exam conditions. General estimate is that this entire answer, part 1A, 10 marks, should not exceed 2 phases. And you know, given handwriting, all that kind of stuff, blah blah blah. But still, I think it shouldn't exceed 2 phases. And if you find that you're exceeding 2 phases, it means that you're already going to lose out time for your part B, which is actually the main part of the SBQ, because that's 30 marks. So do keep in mind the prioritization of your time. So this is where you will need to access the Google Drive to retrieve some documents. Over there, I have put a JPEG file. I scanned my essay planning for this part 1A. So it's over there. You can see the kind of annotations that I do, the highlighting that I do. As I always encourage you all, when you read and analyze the sources, write as much as you can, highlight as much as you can. So I've scanned it and shown you a model of how you can do so. After that, you can go to the PDF file, and it's the sample answer for 1A, which I'll be using for the rest of this podcast. So best is if you can read the entire 1A sample first, the entire answer that I gave you all. So you read it first, you annotate it yourself, see what I wrote and the kind of structures that I use and things like that before you continue on this podcast. So once again, remember that pause button that we talked about just now? Yeah, you pause it. Pause. Yeah, press. Yeah, just move your finger across the mouse pad. And then click, pause. Okay, then you go and read first. Then you come back to this podcast. Okay, now, welcome back. Now, for right now, I'm going to use the essay itself to highlight some of the practical application of the theory that we learned just now. So, just now we started off, no matter which kind of structure you use, you are looking at the first paragraph being a short introduction, outlining the similarities and differences. So let's go through. On assessment of both sources D and E, the author's claims converge on the fact. So at this stage, I'm looking at similarities. So in terms of the broad goals and objectives of regional stability and development, there was a good degree of consensus from the ASEAN founding members. So in terms of the broad goals and objectives, there is a consensus. And that is something that both D and E will converge on. So I identify my similarities. However, a key difference that surfaced from the two extracts is that individual ASEAN member states held different motivations in the pursuance of such overarching objectives, thus diluting the quality of consensus that was seemingly there. So now I identify my differences as them holding different motivations. So sources D and E, they diverge in the fact that one shows a good degree of consensus, the other one actually shows that there were many national-based different motivations. So that kind of dilutes the overall quality of the consensus that was shown in source D, and that may affect the entire quality of the consensus that ASEAN seemingly had. So this is basically the introduction. As I said, it can be just 2 sentences long like this. You can even condense it down even further depending on how much time you have. But basically, it's to just identify both the similarities and the differences. Going on to the similarities themselves, this is the part where we are looking at the inference of both sources. We are looking at the identification of similarities from the two sources. So once again, I start off with like a sort of overarching thesis statement. Both D and E similarly show that there was a good degree of unanimity and agreement over the need for a regional organization to facilitate the overarching goals and objectives. So it tallies with what I said earlier, that there seems to be a good degree of consensus over the broad overarching objectives and goals. Then I go on to the two sources and I pick out evidence. In source D, there's explicit mention, okay, then I do quotation as reflected. Yeah, okay, so it goes on quotation. Then in the same manner, source E reflects the same level of desire and intent for the setup to achieve broad political, so that's sort of a reference to the source as well. So basically the structure is, the red part is the TS, the green parts are the evidence supporting that TS, and all these things is on similarities. A word of note for the two green portions over there, you can see that in terms of referencing the sources, not every time you need direct quotations. Sometimes you can paraphrase, but make sure you paraphrase accurately and make sure that even when you paraphrase, there is still you explicitly mentioning that this is reflected by the source. We always want to show that we are source-led and that we are interacting with the sources in terms of the evidence. Okay, so this is the inference of the similarities portion. The next portion is providing a contextual understanding of the similarity. So why do these two sources, why do these two authors converge on the same points? In this case, the same point is that of the overarching objectives. It seems to be that there's a high degree of consensus over the overarching objectives of ASEAN. So we start off, an account for such a similarity can be ascertained through the source's provenance and its associated context. Now, this is in blue because I put it as blue for language. This is a kind of a statement that you can use to show that now you are moving into providing a contextual understanding. You are looking at the source's provenance. So that indicates that you are moving on from the inference stage. So I do, and then now the red portion, I'm going to go into source D, the provenance itself. So source D is the official ASEAN declaration, and it's a consensus document meant to reflect a high degree of unity. So but I go into the nature of what an ASEAN declaration is. I go into the nature of what an official document like this is meant to do. Okay. Further from that, I also look at the date. The fact that this was published on 8 August 1967 gives greater necessity and urgency for the collective spirit. So again, because of the situation of the source, it does lend itself to the fact that they need to portray this sense of collective spirit and measure of unity. Then I go on to source E, an academic source that is particularly focused on the formation period as seen in the title of the article. So again, I'm interacting with the provenance. As an academic source with this specialized purview, the consensus would definitely be reflected in his pursuance of reconstructing the past. So I'm going into, again, the nature of what an academic source is supposed to do. In this case, reflect upon the overarching objectives of ASEAN and how the founding members had a good degree of consensus over that. And it is a retrospective point of view, 1981, so it has sufficient kind of knowledge and information and source material. So this is explained, this whole portion here is explaining why the two sources are similar, why the two authors converged on a point of similarity. So in fact, if you do something like this already, right, you are already moving on to a skill that is seen in the L3 and the L4 portions. Okay, you're moving on from the inference part. Then I go on to the difference part, and now I go back to the inference of the differences. I'm going back to the low-level skill of the inference of the differences. So again, I start out with the thesis statement of sorts. However, pertaining to the motivations behind the formation of ASEAN, the degree of consensus among members is thrown into question. So that is the overarching thesis. Then I go into the 2 points of evidence. Source D reflects a high level of consensus across 5. Be that as it may, source E reveals that underlying that overarching objective consensus, there were key differences in the motivations of each of the founding members. Then I go into the source evidence for source E, the next green portion over there, and looking at all the different countries, them having different sort of like motivations for ASEAN. So because of these differing motivations and all that, actually the consensus that was seen in source D, and maybe even a bit of it in source E, is actually now thrown into question because pertaining to motivations, it seems that a lot of them are working upon national-based kind of motivations, which does question and throw into doubt the quality of the consensus that ASEAN had, or the ASEAN members had. And then the last part here is what we did just now for the similarities. Now we are doing the contextual understanding for the differences using the source provenance as well. So going into the blue portion, once again, the differences surfaced between the two sources can best be explained by reference to the provenance and its associated context. So this is language you can use to signal that you are moving into contextual understanding. As mentioned, source D is the ASEAN declaration, and being that it had the intended purpose to, okay, blah, blah, blah. So I go into the purpose of the source in order to show why it had to portray things in a certain way. Consequently, because of the way it's portrayed, underlying and differing motivations along national lines, although existing, were not meant to be reflected in the document. So the degree of consensus shown in D is pretty high, but there are big questions over it. As such, the degree of consensus among founding members is high. Okay, yeah, so basically what I said. Source E, on the other hand, is an academic source meant to best represent historical truth. and in the pursuance of this, uncovered different underlying motivations from each member state, from national level perspectives and agenda. So with this degree of consensus set out in source D is now thrown into question, especially over differing nation-based motivations in the pursuance of overarching objectives. So once again, highlighting the fact that while the overarching objectives might have had a degree of consensus over that, the differing motivations over across the 5 founding members was present as well, and that dilutes the quality of the consensus. The fact that this is an academic source written retrospectively might suggest that the author had more source material to work with, considering the historical distance, and as such could present a more holistic and in-depth view of the formation period of ASEAN. So going into the nature of what an academic source is meant to do as well, it is not a public source like what source D was. It's not meant for kind of selling of the organization. It's meant to be an objective view of what happened during the formation period. So by this, it would not be too far to conclude that while founding members held consensus over the overarching objectives, their motivations in pursuance of such aims, and even in establishing the organization itself, was fractional. So this compromises once again on the consensus or the quality of the consensus across the ASEAN members. So this whole podcast right now pertains to this particular SBQ and this particular question 1A. But I hope that you get a better idea of the structure and the kind of objectives and aims that you need to hit when you attempt a 1A question. So now with these two things, like you know what needs to be done, and you know how to structure the answer. You transfer these skills to the next SBQ with 1A. The next one that you have currently right now is the ASEAN and the Cambodian conflict. There's a 1A there as well. So maybe you want to try out those skills on that question 1A. Again, it's up for submission, so you just let me have it if you've done it and you want me to see it. So yeah, thanks guys. I'm just going to do a beatbox intro or outro from this podcast. Boom, chicka boom, chicka boom, chicka boom. Bye bye.